it's women's least favourite act.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so we talked about sexual scripts. Penis and vagina sex being the main course of sex is very much a dominant sexual script. And there are many reasons that's dominant. And it's something that we know from sex research that if you ask people, and they have done many times in sex research, to recount what sex looks like, people will recount a set menu of sex. That is, you start with this, then you do a bit of that, then you go to the main course of penis and vagina sex. The kind of American audience will know that as a kind of baseball analogy. And I think worldwide we know that analogy too, right? That's how we see how sex should be. But what's most fascinating about that is that suits men's anatomy more than women's. We know that the majority of women, about 80%, don't orgasm from penetrative sex, because obviously it's all about the clitoris. And so that's why for women, their most favourite sexual acts are things like people using their hands to stimulate their clitoris or receiving oral sex, not penis and vagina sex. They rate that the least pleasure-inducing sexual act. For men, it's different. It's the highest pleasure-inducing sexual act, right alongside masturbation, actually. What's fascinating is we talk a lot about desire, particularly between men and women when they have sex together, but we don't always talk about the fact that to move towards sex, we have to be motivated to feel that there's going to be a reward. And so when we're having sex that perhaps doesn't suit our anatomy as much as we'd like it to, or when there's a big orgasm gap and someone else is reliably experiencing more pleasure than we are, of course our desire suffers.
Over 40% of women want to be having more sex than they are currently having, which is in chapter 2 of this book in front of me, Mind the Gap.
Mm-hmm.
What about men? So women want to be having, over 40% of them want to be having more sex than they're currently having.
Yeah, there's huge levels of sexual dissatisfaction for people of all genders. Everyone wants to be having more sex, better sex than they're currently having. We know that for women, it's around about, just over half of women, 52%. And for men, it's about 42% are unhappy with the sex lives that they have. Enormous numbers. That's UK data, 15,000 adults between the ages of...
So men are typically more satisfied.
Yeah, and I suggest that the reason for that is that although men experience challenges with desire as well, men find it easier on average to maintain desire for the same person. And as we've already talked about, women struggle to access their spontaneous desire and label that as a problem when it's not. You know, I'm aware we're talking very much about straight couples because that's where we see the majority of sexual problems. But when we talk about men and women having sex together, we also see that orgasm gap. So we see less pleasure and less reward for women, which I think accounts for that slightly higher number.
So you said something in between there that was curious to me. Just to confirm, over long-term relationships, the man is more likely to maintain their desire for the woman in a heterosexual relationship.
That's right.
The woman is more likely to lose desire for her partner.
That's right. And we're talking here, remember, about spontaneous desire. Okay.
Is that...
Remember, there's the responsive desire we talked about earlier. And we know that, and this is the interesting bit, when it comes to women's desire, it's actually much more easier to trigger with a wide range of sexual stimuli than men's. So women's responsive desire works brilliantly. You could say it works even better than men's. So spontaneous desire is only one type of desire. It's that feeling of out of the blue, lust, horniness, want to rip your clothes off. It's partly attributable to higher levels of androgens like testosterone, but certainly not exclusively. There's a massive social component to it as well. So yes, men find it easier to maintain that. But I think it's really important to say, because there will be men listening to this that will be worried about their desire. As we've said earlier, 15% is actually quite a large number. It's not all men. Some men really struggle to keep hold of that spontaneous desire in a long-term relationship.
And just to clarify, the reactive desire is the desire that kicks in once you've begun.
Basically, yeah. Some kind of sexual stimuli, some kind of sexual currency. It comes after arousal. You
must come across so many couples in your clinical practice that have two different visions of what sex should look like.
Yes.
Fantasies, fetishes. You know, this one wants this person to do this to me, but this person thinks that's, horrific.
Mm-hmm.
How does one bridge the gap? And how does one go about even communicating those things? Because I imagine so many people in so many relationships, it's kind of like what you said earlier, having really bad haircuts, having really bad sex, and are saying nothing about it. And
oh, yeah.
I've been in relationships before where I've thought, do you know what? I really want to do that, but I think she'll think that I'm a little bit, too...
Trust me, no one is talking about it. Everyone stays silent and just hopes that the other person will either get the hint or will accidentally stumble upon the thing they really want them to do. It is fascinating, really, when you think about it, because so much of our satisfaction, our life satisfaction, depends on how sex goes, but we just almost leave it to chance by not talking about it. One of the things we might do in sex therapy is by getting people separately to write down what their perfect sex looks like. Mm-hmm. I have an exercise, it's actually free. You can find it on my social media or on my website, which is called Conditions for Good Sex, which guides people through the process of doing that. And it looks at three main areas. One is psychological arousal. What turns you on in your head? What kind of dynamic between you and the person works for you? How do you need to feel about yourself and your optimum sexual experience? One is physical stimulation, and that could be anything from where you like to be touched to the types of sex you like to the type of positions you like to be in. The third is being able to be in the moment. So you might write there the kinds of things that go through your mind to distract you. And I would get people to do that separately. The way I guide people through that is by getting them to think about their three best sexual experiences and really replay those in their mind. What were the aspects of that sexual experience which you replay over and over again? What was it about how you felt about yourself, about how you could be with that person? What was it about what you were doing? What was it about the environment? And people are able to then develop their own perspective, their own list, if you like, of the things that really work for them.
What if your partner says, I don't like it?
Well, that's what we come to next. Then we look for the overlap. So is there overlap? If there's not, then there's a little bit of work to do, right? Are you going to stay in a monogamous relationship? And if so, how are you going to make this work? Are you going to open it up so you can get your sexual needs met elsewhere? Plenty of people do that. Often there is enough overlap for people to say, okay, I didn't realize that that was a thing for you. I like that thing, but maybe not quite to that degree. Can we do this instead? So there's a little bit of negotiation that happens in the middle. But I think perhaps one of the myths around our sexuality is that it exists between us and our partner. And actually, our sexuality just exists within us alone. And we should be allowed to express that alone or in our minds in whatever way that we want. And that could look quite different, what we do alone, perhaps with others, to what we do with another person. So we don't have to get all of our sexual needs met by that one person. There may be other ways of doing it.
Should we remain open-minded to the desires and requests of the other? I remember, I like experimenting, and I think I was once upon a time with someone who was less keen to experiment. And I remember thinking, oh, this is boring. This is going to be really boring. And then over time, I think I was able to introduce things slowly that opened their eyes to experimentation. And then they loved it. They love experimentation. We had the best sex of our lives.
Okay.
Because we introduced things, we experimented more. But I remember reflecting in that moment that I could have easily walked away from the relationship when this person said, oh, no, that's weird. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And it may be that if this other person had done their conditions for good sex, they may have written down under the psychological arousal part, I really need to know someone, or I really need to trust someone before I can do things that are outside of the normal sexual script, right?
Makes sense.
And experimentation could be part of that. I think it also comes down to how you want the kind of personality of your sex life together to be. So I think for some of us, experiencing kind of thrill or joy or pushing boundaries or experimentation in sex is a key part of what really ticks us along, what really keeps us going. For other people, it's just not. It's that they want sex to be predictable, intimate, fun, but close, without anything outside of the ordinary. So I think it can be quite useful to think about, what do we see as the sexual personality of our relationship? How do we want it to be? What would make us feel most alive? And that's where creating a culture of talking about sex is helpful, because without that, how do you know?